Thank you. This is another Zen Peacemaker Circle format. And I'm so happy to welcome back my friend, Dr. Rajni Shankar Brown. And Her bio is in on the website in the event, and it is long enough that it would probably take 20 minutes of the time to go through. So I'll let you read that, but it's extensive and notable. Rajni and I met a little over 3 years ago. We had been planning, Zen Peacemakers had been planning for years to embark on a new bearing witness retreat focused on racism in America. And we decided, lucky us, we decided to try to do it for the first time uh, in 2020.
Mhm.
So, uh, or 21 was it? I forget when it was.
21, 21.
21, yeah, 2021, and no one was traveling, so we ended up doing it virtually. And Rajni was part of a group from Stetson University in Florida, near between Daytona Beach and Orlando, I think is where you are.
Yes.
Um, and uh, Related to a group called Volusia Remembers, and Volusia Remembers had embarked on a project to. I said I wasn't going to talk very long. I'll keep this brief. A project to identify the sites of racist lynchings in the county over history, and then to work with Equal Justice Initiative, Brian Stevenson's organization in Montgomery, to certify those sites and have a slab and remembrance placed at the EGI Museum in Montgomery, which they did. And Rajni was part of the virtual. I think we met for 3 or 4 days online, but then we virtually joined the ceremony in Florida, and it was lovely. So the happy news is we've been able now to go back to Alabama in person 2 years in a row. So Rajni was part of making that happen. So without me taking up any more air in the room, let me go ahead and pass the talking stick to my friend, and we'll see what she has to say for us today about literacy and justice for all is the topic of this talk. Thank you, Rajni.
Well, thank you so much. Namaste. Thank you so much for having me, and to all of the Zen peacemakers out in the world. Thank you for filling our world with love and justice and light and hope. So grateful to be part of this community and to be able to collaborate on such meaningful events such as what Jeff just described. And so I wanted to really center my talk today around literacy and justice for all, and really focus in on literacy, because as we think about even our shared humanity, stories and literature play such a large part of that. Stories are a way that we bridge. Stories are often mirrors. They can be windows and doors and even revolving doors in so many different ways. And I think Jeff just has the perfect backdrop for my presentation today with all his many books. How many books do you have, Jeff?
I have no idea, and there's a whole other room.
uh,
When,
well, I love it.
when my wife, kind of gets after me about it, I said, I don't collect, airplanes or motorcycles, or I don't gamble. It's it's my one vice. So
Well, it's a beautiful vice to have. I support and share that with you. So I love books, right? And I think about in my own journey how books have been just so transformative. And in a way, books and literature and stories have been a guiding compass for me ever since I was a kid. And so growing up, even, during times of really, really deep trauma that I experienced, being able to escape into a public library and being able to get lost in the shelves of wandering and being able to embark on journeys, meet so many individuals through history and real time, from Sojourner Truth to Mahatma Gandhi to Wangari Maathai. I mean, just learning about incredible human beings around the world. It really had such an enormous impact on me spiritually, intellectually, just even in terms of really allowing me to reflect and cultivate my own values and to be able to live out my values, and even shaping my life trajectory. And so I give a lot of deep gratitude to books. And I love in the Indian culture, I should say, we have many, many wonderful traditions and holidays, but one of my favorites, we actually give thanks to Saraswati, who is the goddess of knowledge and, so many different things, creativity. But as part of that, we also give thanks to books. And so we will take time to share our favorite stories and books with one another, take time to literally reflect and give gratitude to the stories that help to shape our lives. And it's always been one of my favorite holidays. It was very special. And I feel really blessed because even, with various hardships and challenges in my life, I had such a priceless gift in having an amma. Amma means mom. Tamil is my first language. And my amma was just such a gifted, vivid storyteller. And so she shared that gift and that love for literacy, that very deep love, really instilled that in me as a child. And I consider it one of the most precious gifts that I'm able to carry today. And so, in our community here today, I wonder, would any of you be willing to share maybe a story from your own childhood or youth, or just a story that has been transformative or played a part in your own journey, just to pause and give some gratitude and contemplate for a moment and perhaps share? Jacqueline?
Yes, well, I'm looking at this lineup of books. First of all, I'm a bookaholic. Hello, I'm Jacqueline, and I'm a bookaholic.
I love it. We're uniting today here.
Yes, bookaholics unite. And yeah, I really resonated to what you just said, Rajni. I have gotten such value and delight from books all my life. And I'm looking at this lineup you have of children's books. I love children's books. And I see Black Beauty is there. I had all of these books. I still do. Black Beauty was the first book I ever cried at. The first story that I got so engaged in that I started crying. And it was shocking in a way, but it was so organic too. So it opened my heart. And
Love that.
books can do that. Stories can do that. They go right into the heart. And that's a great value in teaching compassion, not only to children, but to anybody. So that's my Black Beauty story.
Thank you for sharing that, Jacqueline. I love that. And I love, just the idea of what you shared with empathy and compassion being such a big part when we talk about literacy, being able to feel, as you read Black Beauty, bringing you to tears, right? What a beautiful kind of experience to be able to go on, and such an important experience as well. I love that. Would anybody else like to share a story that's been influential in their own life?
I'll go ahead. I grew up, my folks read a lot too, and I grew up reading and just loving it. And I really don't remember what the first things were that I read, but there is something that I read early that I do remember. And there's a book called The Road to Agra by Amy Sommerfeld. It was written in Norwegian in 1951, and I think published a few years later in English. And it had such an impression on me because it was set in India. It was exotic and it was an adventure, and these young kids on a journey and so forth. and it had such an. I was just looking on my shelf. It had such an impression. I went looking for a copy of it because I didn't have it from when I was a kid. Found one and I bought it, and it's something I've now passed on to my grandkids as well. So I love that process of things moving from one to the next. One of my one of my grandkids is 13, and she's coming next week. And I asked her mom if she'd read Mark Twain, and she said no. And I thought, I read Huck and Tom when I was 13 years old. I'm going to get her a collectible, 2-book set of Huck and Tom. So it's waiting for her here.
Oh, that's great. I love that. The generational pass down too, right? As well, in terms of gifting stories, the stories that we love, being able to share that. And I think that's one of the values. I love that you kind of share that and allowing you, Jeff, I'm guessing when you read that story, you had not been to India, but that story allowed you to transport yourself into kind of another world, another culture. And that's one of the beautiful things as well. And when we think about in terms of our shared humanity and understanding each other, stories can play such a big part where they also help us to even break down fear. They help us to encourage, this adventurous spirit in us. They help us to really unpack so many different types of emotions, being able to really engage in kind of retrospection in such essential ways. And so very, very transformative. I love it. Well, I don't want to miss Doreen, Bruce, or Linda. Does anybody want to share? Or you can just silently kind of remember as well.
Well, let me, can you hear me? I can't tell if I'm.
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear
Yes.
you great.
Well, I've had a hard time deciding which story I wanted to share because books have been just very important to me too. But I think what I'm going to talk about is The Secret Garden, because when this slide first came up, that one just really leapt out at me. And I had not read that as a child. Somehow I just never saw that. And as an adult, a friend that I was working with was talking about how that was a favorite book of hers, and she had given it to her children and to her grandchildren. And so I finally read it a few years ago, and oh my gosh, it is just so, even as an adult, it's just so, it was transformative, I think, in a lot of different ways. And I've been able then to, share it with other people. And either adults who never had a chance to read it or, younger people in my family. So yes, and I'm sort of like Jacqueline. Just looking at this, just the array of books that you have here there's some of my favorites on there. Black Beauty, I must have read like 5 times. And A Wrinkle in Time. They're all just
Classics.
so great. So thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing, Doreen. And yeah, and so many of the classics, it's been interesting to see kind of retelling of stories in different ways as well. So even Matilda is one at the very end, where even just recently they came out with another film interpretation of Matilda. And now, I've been seeing some of the students that I work with and kids starting to pick that book up, right? Not really being familiar. And so it's interesting how sometimes books lead us to different films can lead us to book, but even this kind of multimodal literacy of a world that we live in. I love it. Hi, Linda. Hi, Bruce. Do you both want to share? You're good? Okay. I just don't want to miss anyone. So I'm going to turn this over here to start to think about this idea of banned books. Right now in the United States, we are seeing a time where we are seeing the highest bans happening, and we're going to get more in depth into that. One of the stories where you may be very familiar, because it's actually one of the most translated stories in the world and most sold copies in the world, is Where the Wild Things Are. This is a story, of course, and the illustrations are also done by Maurice Sendak. And it won the Caladot medal. And it really has an interesting history, because when Maurice first published it and it came out in 1963, there was actually such enormous resistance and pushback and it made the banned list in 1963. And there was a lot of advocacy where, educators and even parents and people got together and reading the story, they were captivated by the imagination, by so many different aspects of it. And so they were able to push to bring it back into the public sphere and to actually eliminate a lot of those bans. Well, here we are again in 2023. And when you look at banned book lists across the United States, in so many states, this is one of the books back on the list. And so it's really interesting to think about this idea of banning and censorship, and who has the right to ban a story or censor. Where does that power come from? What does that mean in terms of limiting stories that are told and shared? All really, really critical questions for us to ask. And of course, here I put a little excerpt from the story, and you can see how this story is one that's captivated the imagination for generations now, right? That very night in Max's room, a forest grew and grew until a ceiling hung with vines, and the walls became the world all around, and an ocean tumbled by with a private boat for Max. And he sailed off through the night and day, and in and out of weeks, and almost over a year, to where the wild things are. And so in this story, we see this little boy, Max, right, being transported really in his imagination and meeting all of these different kinds of mythical creatures as well. Now, if you're familiar with the work of Shel Silverstein has written so many poems, and there are some that are really gems that I just love and adore. I used to love these poems. Some of them are so silly. Some of them can be very fun. I loved how his books also juxtapose often just ink illustrations that were often quite simple, but they were something that often would captivate and really resonate with me as a child. And so two of the poems I love, one that I've shared with my own children since they were really even in the womb, I should say. Listen to the mustn'ts, child, listen to the don'ts. Listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never haves, then listen close to me. Anything can happen, child. Anything can be. This idea, right, of not being restricted by all of the different messaging that sometimes tells us things cannot happen, things are impossible, and yet this idea to break that, this idea to see impossible as I'm possible, what is possible. And then Hug-a-War is one that I think is so sweet, and our world could use a lot more of today, just looking around at our world. I will not play at tug-a-war. I'd rather play at Hug-a-War, where everyone hugs instead of tugs, where everyone giggles and rolls on the rug, where everyone kisses and everyone grins, and everyone cuddles, and everyone wins. And so just again, a very sweet and simple poem, but actually you can unpack this in a lot of ways and have a lot of critical dialogue around it. So this is my baby girl when she was little. My baby girl is not so little anymore. She just turned 13 in May, but nonetheless, still my baby, as I remind her every day. And some days my baby girl is 13 going on 23 these days, but she is a lot of fun. And behind her is actually my son standing. And these were shirts that one of my students so thoughtfully created and gifted them during a holiday season. And so even though they've outgrown these shirts, they're shirts that I definitely have kept in their closets and that I often will even take out as decorations when I'm teaching around literacy, because I just love them. They were made with love as well. And you can see one of them says, books are magical. There's this kind of magic in books. And the other one says, literacy, change the world one reader at a time. And I love that reminder of the social change aspect that also can come with literacy. So children's literature, and I'm so glad so many of you shared, a love, like Jacqueline said, I love children's books, right? And children's literature, it's interesting, we often call it children's literature, but often what we know, especially lovers of children's literature, are they are for all ages. You can take a picture book and you can have so many different types of conversations when you're working with a toddler, all the way to working with an adult, where it's kind of like an onion, right? You can keep unpeeling and getting to different layers. And so children's books are bodies of work and often have accompanying illustrations. And it is actually one of the ways that we're able to teach as an educator diverse learners as well. When you think about students who may struggle with literacy skills, especially knowing children, we have such disparities, even what I call a book divide in our nation, where you have babies who, what a privilege and a gift, who may have their own little childhood library growing up, books that they can actually touch and look at and spend time with, books that have maybe been passed down by loved ones. But you also have a lot of children who never owned their own book. It's not till they get to school that maybe they're having access with literature. And so this divide is very real and really connected to a lot of sociological disparities, historical disparities as well, including the isms, right? Racism, even connected to sexism, heterosexism, all of these isms very tangled in this. And so when we look back at earliest written children's books, scholars, of course, have different perspectives on this, but there are many that actually say the Panchan Chatra. And if you've never read the Panchan Chatra, it comes from ancient India, and they include kind of 5 books of animal fables. And they're really beautiful stories because they have poetic verse, but also prose. And it's believed to have been written in Sanskrit, one of the world's most ancient languages, around 200 BC. And the stories are said to have been written by Vishnu Sharma, but there's also speculation that many people contributed, where we have a lot of stories that are kind of single authored. Back then, storytelling had a way, especially with oral stories, by the time they made it to a page, there were many contributions from many people into that story, a real collective work, if you will. And so these are stories that are filled with a lot of imagination. They have a lot of lessons on values, of course, and practical wisdom. But many people haven't ever heard of the Panchan Chatra. You probably have heard of Aesop's fables, right? And so these actually are said to have influenced many of Aesop's fables. So there's a lot of, when you read them, you'll see a lot of similarities and connections. You have these animals that are characters that are also teachers. Also really said to influence a lot of European folk tales that are very popular, including the Grimm's brothers or Grimm's tales. And that's actually an image of original artwork from some of the illustration from the story. And you can see here, this is a story that has a rabbit and an elephant, and it's quite an intriguing and fun story that teaches quite a lot of lessons. So even when we think about literacy, we have a lot of work to do around our world. Right now, literacy is one of the essential human rights. You think about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that came out even in 1948. So many different countries signed on, including the United States. But yet, we have such high numbers of illiteracy. And we have gaps in terms of access to literacy in ways as well. And so globally, if you look at it, the United Nations says well over 750 million adults still cannot read or write a simple statement. But one of the things that I bolded here is, globally speaking, 2/3 are women. And I think that's really important for us to contemplate and consider, because literacy plays many different roles. We spoke a lot today as we gathered and opened today's conversation around the many joys of literacy, the teaching that comes with literacy, the gifts of lessons, the gifts of adventure, empathy. Here's the other thing. Literacy is also critical for us to be able to fully participate in society and to have our agency. When you think about from voting to being able to advocate for our public health, literacy plays a huge role in that. And so we know that while we've made progress in places, as the United Nations has worked hard to document, we still have a long way to go. And there's still a very, very huge gender gap as well when we think about access to literacy. And some of this also it's very intentional. Who do we keep from learning these skills that are gateway skills to participate in the world? And so you can actually take this global issue of kind of oppression with literacy and start to even parallel this right now, what's happening with book bans in the United States, because now there's this real concerted effort to control stories, what stories are told, whose stories are told, whose are not told, whose are being removed from bookshelves very actively in our schools and in our public libraries. And there is a lot of money being poured in to these efforts. And it's very political as well when you start to look at this. And it's really, really deeply distressing. Now, as we're talking about concepts today, I do also want to bring up this idea of illiteracy. So illiteracy not being having the ability to read and write. Illiteracy is also a very, very huge issue in our society now, where it is where folks might have the ability to read and write, but they choose not to partake in the activity. We see this actually as a huge and significant issue with young adolescents, where so many middle schoolers, high schoolers, when we're doing these surveys and focus groups and talking to youth, there are so many that will openly say the last thing I want to do is pick up a book. When you ask how many books do you read, many will say, I don't read, I don't pick up a book. This is a huge amount of young adolescents, right? And so it's really, really interesting. And you have to start to think about, what are reasons why, right? Why for this? And, I think technology has so many different pros, of course, and we're enjoying one today as we, from all over, right, different regions, we're able to connect. There's so many beauties behind technology, but it's interesting because there are also some cons, right? Where for many youth, books are not part of there's this kind of a gap now with literacy connection, deep literacy connection, just like we have, and this is a talk for another day, Jeff, I can come back and talk on this one day, but this idea of eco-affinity and how many youth do not have that now. And there's this gap we're seeing with their connection to nature, connection to planet, and it's very, very real. And so this is all stuff that we have to kind of think about. And when we think about this idea of literacy and we think about justice for all, there's a lot of compounded issues for us to sort through as we try to really promote literacy actively as well. So this is just a video clip that I had picked that I think is really telling. What I'm going to do though, just because of time is, Jeff, if I send this, would you be able to send it to our guests here today? Do you have email addresses for those who signed up?
Yes, we do.
Awesome. I'm going to send you this video clip. It's really brief. And you're going to get to hear people speaking and sharing many of the challenges from being illiterate, right? Having illiteracy as a part of their journey. One of those challenges you'll really start to hear comes around public health. And, if you've been to the doctor recently, how many forms are often handed to you that you have to fill out and you have to sign. And if you cannot read and write, that can be a very intimidating process. And there are many who will avoid going to the doctors because they can't read and write. And again, so you start to see this as even a larger public health issue when we start to talk about illiteracy. Now, in April, there is a International Children's Book Day. So if you don't celebrate it, certainly start to celebrate it. Of course, every day is International Children's Book Day for many of us book lovers. But this is a day that actually, it was founded on the birthday of Danish author Hans Christian Andersen, who wrote a lot of famous tales, right? From The Ugly Duckling to The Snow Queen, which influenced, do you all know which Disney movie was influenced by this?
Frozen?
Frozen, absolutely, right? So you start to see how the influences kind of have trickled out. The Emperor's New Clothes, Red Shoes, The Little Mermaid, and of course we had a new Little Mermaid just recently come out and is in theaters. The Princess and the Pea, Thumbelina, The Little Match Girl, many, many stories. But the International Children's Book Day was really created to further this deep love of reading and to celebrate books. Now, this year on April 2nd, it was super sad. I felt sad. I usually am super happy during this day, but I felt this real deep sadness and grief that I just really had to give myself space to sit with. Even though I had a range of joyful literacy activities planned to do in the community to celebrate, I really carried this heavy grief. And so part of it was, you know, this has been a time where, especially in the spring and over the past year, we have continued to see horrific book bans, banning of books and vital, beautiful stories. And it really, really is heavy. And I live in Florida, and you know, our state has surpassed Texas now as being the #1 state for book bans. And there are schools, I go in and out of schools, you know, all week long as a part of the work that I do, my life's work. And it breaks my heart because there are media centers now where we have just empty bookshelves, completely empty, or books have just been removed. And some libraries are so scared with the attacks that are coming, right? Very real attacks. And in our state, legislation that is backing up and encouraging all sorts of hateful behavior. And it is really problematic. And we just have massive shortages with educators and high turnover now, and book bans are also adding to that, playing a huge part in that. So, you know, when we think about book bans in the US, I think that it's really important for us to really start to dive deeply and understand what is going on when we really start to talk about book bans. And I pulled a few things here that I want to highlight and share. When you look across the United States, you can start to see now where there were certain states that had active book bans, but now the map is actually covered in terms of censorship action and bans that are taking place. There are states where the bans are magnified: Florida, Texas, Utah, Missouri, South Carolina. These are some of the states where it's really magnified. Now, the challenges take place in different spaces, from public libraries having bans to school libraries and schools. So if you start to combine the schools and school libraries, that's 51% of the bans are taking place there. When you start to dig deeper to look at the stories that are being taken out, if you look at the middle column there, this comes from the work of PEN America, where they've been doing really in-depth studies to look at what are the stories that are being banned. 41% have protagonists that are prominently characters of color, Black and brown people. 33%, but this currently has actually escalated and gotten even higher. So we're now over 40% for sure. You know, are banning books that have characters or themes connected to LGBTQIA Two-Spirit plus characters. 25% sexual content, but some, I'll tell you, have really, really good educational lessons for young adolescents. So one example would be, there's a book called Speak by Laurie Hansen, and the book goes into rape, but it also talks about a young girl and how she is coping and the realities of that. And I have done incredibly powerful book talks and groups with young adolescents, right? And really important conversations that we have to have. What does it look like? How do we protect ourselves? And, working globally in education systems, it's very different here in terms of the limitations of what we teach in terms of rights and agency compared to other parts of the world, where it's much more embedded. Human rights are much more prioritized in conversations. 22% directly address race and racism, and so many stories about the civil rights movement, wonderful stories from Rosa Parks to Dr. Martin Luther King, pulled right off of our bookshelves. And this also leads to really, really distressing problems around teaching biased history that is not truthful, which we have a history of doing in the United States in our public schools. And actually over the past decade, there's been this organizing and mobilizing to start to say, no, it's so important that we are teaching truthful history, that diverse voices are part of the curriculum. And now there's this pushback, again, moving us backwards in so many ways. Biographies, themes around rights and activism, stories even about current youth activists like Malala and Greta being pulled from shelves. Now, I put here a picture. You can see all of these boxes filled with books. And this is a neighboring county right where I live in Florida, Brevard County. And the public schools went in and they picked out any book that had an LGBTQ plus theme or character, even books like Family is Family. It's such a beautiful story. You start to see these images of all different types of families. And it's just the celebration of people and families. All of these books pulled, right? And we have a law that came into effect that are very, very hateful law between the Stop Woke Act in Florida and now Don't Say Gay law. These are also adding to these book bans, right? These really, really troubling book bans. So here, I just want to show you, right? This is my daughter's hand, and this was her in first grade. Again, now she's an 8th grader, but this is just a picture, a photograph that I took that I treasure. I love this, seeing her little henna hands, and her teacher was so lovely, and her teacher at this time, really encouraged reading and allowed them to pick books that interested them. And it was really interesting because in her class, I spent a lot of time in her classroom, and the kids had so many different interests, right? From baseball to science to, in Ramila's case, she loves learning about people who are change makers, trailblazers. And probably I end up doing a lot of stories around that with my kids. And so there's this kind of natural love for it. But one of the stories was Rosa Parks, and she had found this really sweet book that is part of a series. It's part of a series called People Change the World. And this story is by Brad Meltzer. And it's such a sweet story about Rosa Parks. And here she is kind of writing her summary, right, about Rosa does not give up her seat, how she got arrested. But she ends by saying, right, she is a human rights, a civil rights heroine, and one of her heroes. This book is one of the books that is banned on banned lists in so many states. This book, it is such a sweet story that introduces kids to the life of Rosa Parks. Some other books that are banned: Malala, A Hero for All, Anne Frank. This children's book by Mary Nin is so sweet. It's part of the Mini Movers and Shakers series, which I love. Really, really beautiful artwork by Yulia Zolatova. And the artwork is just stunning. It's kind of layered with this kind of white chalk graphic in the back and beautiful artwork. These stories are now banned. One of my favorite stories, Martin and the Mountaintop, the sanitation strike of 1968. And I love this story, not only because of the artwork, because of what it teaches us from history, but also that there's so many historical connections in this story that are vital for us to know, vital for us to understand. This also won the Coretta Scott King Nonviolent Award. Again, a beautiful story that's been pulled and is banned in so many states, so many public schools, and even pulled from public libraries. Some other stories that I love, and I honor these stories as we talk about them today because they are beautiful stories that deserve to be shared and told. Abuela by Arthur Doros, illustrated by Elisa Clevin. This is a lovely story. If you've never read it, I encourage you to go to your local library and get a copy of Abuela. You'll just love it. The images, the imagination, the cultural connections, really beautiful story. Love Makes a Family by Sophie Beer. This is such a delightful story. You start to see love centered in all of these families and families that look like all sorts. And what I love is this allows different children and youth to see themselves, and even adults, right? To see themselves in stories. And it allows us to see the beauty of diversity. As Maya Angelou said, in diversity, there is beauty and there is strength, right? And it celebrates that. A family is a family is a family. This is the one I mentioned before. And again, a really, really fun story. So this, again, is my daughter, and I'm using a lot of images or stories about her today, it seems. But this, so when she was in elementary school, they had a really, really fun book parade where all the kids got to pick their favorite story, and they dressed up as a character from that story, and they paraded around the school. And, they were even encouraged to share about their story, have conversations throughout the day about their stories. Kids were naturally intrigued, curious. It just was such a joyful, full event. And, there were all kinds of stories. And my daughter picked a book that her big brother, my son, Valen Siddhartha, had gifted this book to Ramila Sitara, and it's called The Paper Bag Princess. If you've not read this story, it is delightful, and it is really a play and pushes against traditional fairy tales. So here we have this paper bag princess who, instead of needing a prince to save her, she is able to be strong and fierce and saves herself. It's just a really, really cool story, very empowering, as a young girl. And she loved and still loves this book. This is one that she still has displayed proudly in her room. And so she just, she was the paper bag princess, and pretty much nobody had heard of this story. She was able to kind of educate on it. It's such a great story. Well, the story is on the banned list. So how sad that, so many kids now will never know, will never get to meet the paper bag princess. And that breaks my heart because it really is a story worth telling. Now, this is my son. I couldn't leave him out when he was young. And this is, he would just die if he knew I was showing you this photo, but that's okay. He is now 19 and in college and works at a library because he cannot get away from books. He loves books. He would spend all day with books and writing if he could. He's quite a writer himself. And so, he just found such whimsical fun in this graphic novel series called The Adventures of Captain Underpants. And so if you've never seen the series, it's super silly, somewhat stupid in places, but you know what? It has such imagination. And he loved this graphic novel. And so this is him pretending to be Captain Underpants with his cape on, running around the house to save the day and have adventures, and really, really fun story. And this entire series now has been banned. And what I would say is this is one of the series that is has been notated, has such a powerful series to get struggling readers involved in reading, especially young boys, because there's adventure, it's funny, lots of humor in the story, and the graphics, the cartoon style. And now this series again has been taken out. Now, these are some of my own personal favorites. And they're stories that forever, I have my own collection of children's books, and I do lessons with youth in the community and in schools. And now so many of the schools I work in, these books, these beautiful, precious stories are forbidden from coming into those spaces. Fry Bread, a Native American family story. This is a lovely story, and it goes into Native American culture and tradition. Layla's Lunchbox, a Ramadan story, won several prizes, not only for the artwork, but the beautiful writing. Peace. This is probably one of my most favorite stories. I love the images too. The artwork just captivate me. Our Moon Festival, and Dim Sum for Everyone. It's a really, really fun story. And so these are great stories, and often, wonderful ways that we learn about different cultures. So this goes back to even, how Jeff was so captivated, as he said, right? When he read The Road to Agra, it was something new that he got to explore and experiment with and see something different than the space that he lived in. And I love, right? Stories do influence, right? And you think about Jeff now is one of the most adventurous people, right, out there who loves to plunge, as the ZPI says, deeply, learn about other cultures. And so I think, all of our children deserve opportunities to get to know and to learn. And in fact, I would actually say we have a civic responsibility to help all of our children become global citizens, because of the world that we live in today. In fact, when you look from even a business point of view, right? So I am a poet and an artist and a teacher, but I just graduated with my MBA because I can't stop learning. And I wanted to push myself with some different skill sets. And it was interesting in this journey, I really got a good sense of learning about kind of global employers around the world and what they're looking for. I did some interviews as part of a project and lots of research. And, global citizens, people who could navigate across cultures, having strong intercultural communication skills, being able to collaborate, being empathetic, being creative. These are skill sets that are now needed, especially in a world where so many things are uncertain. This is a book that means so much to me. It's called Festival of Colors, and I just was so happy when the book came out. It celebrates the holiday of Holi, which is a holiday we celebrate in our tradition in the spring. And it is a celebration of spring, a celebration of colors, a celebration of love and goodness in our world, a celebration of justice. And we celebrate often by having different rice powders, often dyed in different ways. And we throw these powders, I say, everybody kind of wakes up and often will wear white. And by the end of the day, we are all walking around like rainbows. And it's such a fun holiday, really, really fun holiday. And so this book is one that I've used forever to come teach about the holiday, right? When I'm doing kind of diversity teaching of different cultural holidays in schools. And now this is banned. Pretty much every school district I work in now, this story is banned. And it's a great story. I actually have a really fun read aloud. Maybe I'll add that as a bonus when I send Jeff my other resource and you all can actually hear the story. It's just such a lovely story. So again, here's what we know now. PEN America continues to do research, and 41% again, LGBTQ plus themes or main characters, 40% main characters are people of color. And so again, even as we talk about justice, we can see it as one way, the transformative power that literacy plays to promote and advance justice. And we also start to see the threat against justice within book bans. Kofi Annan, so I think powerfully reminds us that literacy is a bridge from misery to hope. It is a bulwark against poverty and a building block of development. Literacy is the means through which every man, woman, child, and I'm going to add human being, can realize their full potential. Literacy is transformative. Stories are transformative. So April 23rd to 29th, this past April, and again, next April, right, we'll have National Library Week. This April, again, there's this heaviness as we see the threat that is happening to our public libraries. And one of the things that I think that we all need to do is support our public libraries, really support, because public libraries, they serve such essential roles in our communities and around justice. Something else fun that I'll introduce you to. Have you all heard of Dolly Parton's Imagination Library? Okay, I see a few head nods here. Yeah. So this is really fun, but I am part of this Imagination Library and have helped set it up in communities. And it really is wonderful. So Dolly Parton, if you know her history, her father did not have the ability to read or write. And she really witnessed those struggles growing up. And one of the things she knew is the transformative power that stories played in her own life, being able to read and write. And she wanted every child to have access to literacy and to books. And so in 1995, this program actually launched, and it's wonderful. Ages 0 to 5 years old, a child can get a free book, absolutely free, mailed to their house for no cost. And it's pretty amazing because now the program has expanded outside of the United States, from Australia to Ireland to countries in Asia and Africa. And so there are 2 million books mailed now globally each month, thanks to this program. And I love this. She says, when I was growing up in the hills of East Tennessee, I knew my dreams would come true. I know there are children in your community with their own dreams. They dream of becoming a doctor or an inventor or a minister. Who knows? Maybe there's a little girl whose dream is to be a writer and singer. The seeds of these dreams are often found in books, and the seeds you help plant in your community can grow across the world. So I just love this. And, I love it. And I have to say, this Imagination Library is one way we can also get involved and kind of support, even if it's just sharing this resource in our communities to families who could benefit, right? Children who could benefit. And this allows children to have kind of access and build a school library. Now, a lot of my work, I work with people who are unsheltered, who are experiencing homelessness. But even, there are ways where we can work with families to pick up the books, and it can be mailed to a public library or to an emergency shelter. So there are many ways, and owning your own book. I mean, the way a child's eyes light up to be able to hold and have their own book, a book to call their own. I just want to put on everybody's calendar that banned books this year will be October 1st to the 7th. And so I am hopeful that Zen Peacemakers International will join the free books movement. Let freedom read is the theme this year, let freedom read. And Jeff, if I can help with any events during this time, or just let me know, I am all in, all in. So happy to help spread the word. So, as we're kind of closing out today, let's continue to share the priceless gift of literacy. And there are a lot of different ways we can do that, right? One way is passing stories on that we love or that we discover. I love that Doreen discovered the secret garden later in life, right? And found that treasure. So passing on stories to each other, advocating, supporting our teachers, our schools, our public libraries. Frederick Douglass told us that once you learn to read, you will forever be free. Right? You'll be free forever. Literacy is also about liberation. It's essential, in fact, to liberation. The Zen Peacemakers had me do a talk a while back on my collection of poetry, Tuluminous. And so, I'll share that this collection is really special. All of the proceeds go actually to help youth experiencing homelessness and the arts. But one of the poems in this book that I have is actually called Essentials: Iron, Calcium, Zinc, Vitamins, and Books. And I thought I would end today, kind of close this out by sharing a little excerpt from this book. So give me just a second. I'm going to pull up my poem here. Oh, you have my book. Jeff has my book out. Yay. I love it. I love it. So this actually comes from when you are often when you go to an OBGYN and you're pregnant as a woman, they give you this kind of list of things that you need in your body, right? And they'll say it's really important you have enough iron, calcium, zinc, and vitamins. And so I am adding books to that list. The human heart beats more than 100,000 times a day. And in the beating of our hearts are stories. B-O-O-K-S. B-O-O-K-S. Books are as important as water and air. Literacy is a human right or social responsibility to protect and share. It is essential to growth. Reading stimulates imagination. It provides the most powerful vacations, paving paths for hydration, transformation, liberation. Literacy is the foundation to any vocation. A human right that we must advocate for and share. Books are as important as water and air. We live in a broken world. Divisive rhetoric and overflowing isms refracting our children through unjust prisms. Millions of children living in poverty, unequal access and opportunities violently shaking lives, earthquakes of despair, immensely unfair, desperately in need of immediate repair. Over 85% in our juvenile court system are illiterate. A haunting correlation in our industrialized nation, wisdom woven from the words of Frederick Douglass, who reminds us it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. 1 in 4 children in America, the beautiful, grow up without learning how to read, reflecting a massive urgent need for B-O-O-K-S. We cannot afford to simply ignore and watch our children bleed. Together, we must concede and nourish a united love for literacy. B-O-O-K-S. Doctors insist that babies need iron, calcium, zinc, vitamins A, B, C, D, E, and K, each and every day, critical for brain and heart development to promote cell growth, bone mass, and vision. But missing from this medical list are books. A distressingly common nutritional deficiency, essential roots for any giving tree. Books. Babies need books. Critical for brain and heart development, to promote cell growth, bone mass, and vision. Books like water and air help us grow and thrive. a celebration of being alive. Mirrors, windows, wings. Thank you. And I kind of cut, the poem is a bit long, but I wanted to give you all just a bit of that, just to really listen to and hear. And, I close out, this is my Amma, who is my lifelong teacher, and who is the one that I give gratitude, because taught me how to read. And, even when we didn't have a lot and had so much trauma in our life, books were a healing tonic. And so this is her reading to my children. And this book is called P is for Papadums. Papadum is the Indian chip. It's so lovely. And this is such a fun book. It takes you through the alphabet with all sorts of Indian celebrations of things, banned. So that's the sad part. But you know what? We can support by reading and sharing these stories and advocating. Thank you so much for letting me come and share today, and for all of you for loving and celebrating and gifting books. Let's continue onward and upward together. Namaste.
Thank you, Rajni. And friends, we have time. If you have questions or comments, please. We're a small group, so go ahead and wave your hand. And if you've got something to ask or to say, Jacqueline.
Thank you. I'm very moved by your talk, and I would like to do something in regards to supporting the magic of books for children. And so in California, we're not experiencing this. I mean, like,
Much better.
yeah.
School districts I work with in California are working on embedding African American studies, Asian studies into curriculum, while here it's completely being taken out. Yeah.
Right. So coming from California in my community, I'm wondering how I can be useful to the process.
I love that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline. And so one of the things I think, there are now petitions showing support, to get rid of book bans, and kind of massive. In fact, there are now court cases where an example would be PEN America. It has now a huge lawsuit against the state of Florida for saying that you're violating actually amendments, including, our First Amendment, right? And the interesting thing is you have this kind of money poured in, including a lobbying group called Moms for Liberty. Ironically, that's their name, but they are very, very active to get these books banned. And what's interesting is, they're banning the books for all children, as opposed to saying, if you don't want your child to be, right? Why are you taking away all these stories from my child? So there are petitions. That is one way I think we can help, is to share that out and to sign on. Amanda Gorman, our presidential poet, recent presidential poet, The Hill We Climb, her beautiful poem and book is now banned in so many places. And so she has been a very active voice. And so there's some organizing there where we can actually sign on to get involved. So that's one way. I think another way is to, everybody has different means, but even if it's a small financial contribution, contributing to something like the Dolly Parton Imagination, library, because that's still allowing these beautiful stories to be kind of vesseled and put into people's hands, right, in communities and families. So that would be another way, that you could get involved. I think all the way from California, right, kind of sharing out and getting involved. I think, there's a couple of different kinds of movements that I think are really important in just educating out so people know and people can start to mobilize against, because in school districts, especially across in different states, they need the support even from people from other states in order to show numbers and to say, we are pushing back. We, the people, are getting together and pushing back. And so what I'll do when I share the video link that I wanted to share with Jeff, I'm going to actually put a few action ways to get involved too.
Great.
I have kind of a list I made that I share with my students. And so I'll be sure to share that out as well.
Great. Thank you. That's wonderful.
Thank you. And that just uplifted my heart that you even, you asked that and love it.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I mean, it was just I like Jacqueline, it's very moving. I also just so appreciate that you're a dancing poet and your stuff is just so alive. I mean, I had seen you in 2 years ago in the virtual racism thing. And that's the first time that I had, just knew about you. And this was just fabulous. One thing I wanted to say actually for Jacqueline is in your area that has different issues, there could be schools or groups that get either donations of books or money to create backpacks with books for kids that don't have them. I mean, sometimes in migrant areas or things like that. I mean, I know I'm in North Carolina, and we're having our own issue with things. We're not like California, but I know that that's something that we can do here to help at least our local kids get books and things. I wanted to ask you, I understand to a certain extent why people get so upset about LBGT. I mean, that's just been an ongoing issue. I don't mean that I agree with it, but I have a clearer sense of where that's coming from. It's amazing to me, though, that so many of the other books that you showed that have been banned.
Yeah.
I mean, do they even look at the book? Do they just if it just has somebody that is a person of color on it? Or, I mean, how have you understood this? I mean, I know that it's definitely a white majority, thinking that they're Christian or something. I have no idea.
Well, and the funding and money that comes into groups that are able to push to get the bans actually manifested, very, very extreme conservative and far right-winged.
Yeah.
And, not to bring politics, but it's very political in ways as well. And, it's interesting because they have found all sorts of different ways to ban the books, right? And so one of the things they have brought up is, using by having, so an example would be Layla's lunchbox that I showed you, that it's about Ramadan, the holiday, but it just shows a little girl and her cultural practice, and it's a sweet story. But they, the people who have asked for it to be banned said, that's religious indoctrination. You should not have that in the school. Right. And it should not even, but here's what's interesting. The stories that are pulled are anything that's diverse, that's different than what is the dominant kind of accepted narrative, right? And so stories that have, Christian traditions are not being pulled, right? When you start to look at what's being pulled. And also, there's this kind of disconnect in understanding, for so many communities, I mean, culture, traditions, holidays, students need to understand and learn about all of that and see themselves represented, because often they never see themselves, right. Represented. And so we often teach these kind of very biased single stories. But there is this kind of effort to pull stories. And again, they are stories that are predominantly Black and Brown individuals. That's the huge, and then you start to see stories with intersecting kind of identities being pulled as well. Mm-hmm. And so more and more too, stories around activism and civil rights. It had kind of smaller numbers, but it's been interesting. I've been looking, and I would say the numbers are actually higher, at least in districts here, where there's been a lot of effort to pull anything that has even a tinge of activism, especially if it's coming from Black and brown communities, like civil rights movement, right? That has something that centers around, equality, for all. So it's very troubling, and you can see so many different things are used to kind of reasons why. And what happens is often school districts, at least, will have a process where they bring it before a school board. The sad part is the folks who are vocal, there are so many folks who disagree in the community and they absolutely are disgusted by what's going on, but they're not showing up to fight back. Right. And so that's where I think this mobilization has to happen, because if they're going to come in full force with numbers, if we show up at a school board meeting as well and say, no, right, this is not okay. We need to keep these stories on the shelves. That can have a huge amount of impact. And we have seen districts where it has actually overthrown, and where some districts have come back and said, you know what, we're going to choose to keep the stories. And if you don't want your child to read it, you can opt out, right? So you can create an opt out as opposed to us pulling all the books from the bookshelf.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And I love what you shared, your, literacy bags and donating books, especially in areas that don't have it. That's so critical. And so one thing I think you can do is, find out, where are your local, nonprofits that are serving youth, especially in high poverty communities, because often they can use book donations. Even housing emergency shelters, they often don't have books for children, right? So providing books, if you have extra books, or doing book drives, right, to collect books is a wonderful thing. So thank you for sharing that.
How many of us read Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 and 1984 in Brave New World, and back then assumed it was fiction, and it's coming to fruition for sure. One of the things that I've heard, and I don't know if this is accurate news reporting, but in some school districts, it can literally be the case that if a single parent objects, then it can trigger a book being pulled from a curriculum or from a library. And then you go, and I want to be real careful here because I can get off onto a political tangent really easily. But then you go and you look at, and the statistics I think probably vary from one survey to the next. But one of the more reliable ones indicates that 55% of adult Americans read at or below the 6th grade level, and 21% are functionally illiterate. So, and without judging people or shaming those people, because those are their life circumstances, I'm sure, rather than choice. But to have them then be deciding curricula, or having any say over banning books and stuff, just seems kind of askew. To be nice, to be nice.
There's a lot of just a lot of complexities. I mean, people don't even realize. I mean, that's one of the other things you can do is even volunteering at an adult literacy center to help someone read, to give that gift, because we have such high illiteracy, and people do not realize that, and it's very real, and so much of it is often invisible too, right? And so because of stigma and shame and all of that, but you're right also about one parent or guardian can create where it changes and takes a book off the shelf for everyone. I mean, in fact, that's how it started for the Amanda Gorman, The Hill We Climb. It was one single person, right, coming and complaining. And then it's like the book gets pulled. And here we have, unfortunately, in Florida, there are laws that back up and give parents that right. And parents it encourages where they can sue a media specialist or a teacher. And so then what's happened is this fear mongering too, right? I don't want to be caught with, I'm going to just have empty bookshelves because I don't want to have a lawsuit. Or be held liable in some sort of way, because I still have to provide for my family, right? This is my job. I mean, it puts people in incredibly unfair position. So
Yeah.
very, very complex in terms of issues.
Yeah. I wanted to share something else. Let me see if I have it. Well, I can just tell you without showing you. But when you were talking about working with people who are homeless or dwelling insecure, I went to, I'm in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I went to an event last weekend that was a collaboration between a church that works with the homeless or dwelling insecure and a group called Authoring Action that generally works with teenagers around finding their voice as a way of, just empowerment. And they've been around for a long time, but this is the first time they had worked with adults. And these adults, every word in the program was from these adults who don't have a regular place to live. And the title of I guess subtitle was sharing your story as a form of justice. And just everything that you've talked about is that.
Yeah.
And to keep finding, places in our communities that are working toward that, however, and being supportive.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. And sharing our stories, right? It's so important. So important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. This is such a gift to be able to be in beloved community today and have a chance to talk and connect and celebrate books. And yeah, thank you. My heart is very full.
Thank you.
Raj,
Thank you so much.
may I
Lit a
ask,
fire under me.
may I ask
Here I go.
a quick question before we go? And perhaps you mentioned this, but all of the books that you talked about as you went through, are they listed somewhere? I'm guessing maybe they're at PEN America.
Yes. So there are quite a few different banned book lists that are circulating, especially the most frequently banned book lists. And so I will add that to the resources I send to you, Jeff.
Great.
Great.
And then we can
Thank
share
you.
that with everybody, and then we can go buy all those books.
That's what I was about to say. Go buy them.
Yes. Yes,
will.
and donate them.
Well, that's the other funny thing is there's a author, Jason Reynolds, but he's a young adolescent author. And I heard him kind of jokingly say, right, just go tell all the teens the books are banned, and then they're going to go find a way to go get the books and read them, right? And so
Like The Catcher in the Rye was a
That's
big
good.
one.
That's good.
yes.
Well,
That's right.
this just solved my a whole year's worth of birthdays, Hanukkah, and Christmas.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
aw,
For sure.
Rajni, thank you so much for being our
Thank
guest today
you.
and
Thank you.
sharing. Very
yes,
much appreciated, and thank you all for participating
you.
and being so lively. Thank you.
yes. What a fun day. Stay well, everyone.